subject of this forum, namely conflict and conciliation in a people's politics. Looking back, do we look back or do we look forward? It's not only timely, but of great significance. In today's world, which has not seen the end of conflict and turmoil. In recent times, we have seen new conflicts breaking out in many parts of the world, namely Gaza, Syria, and a number of other places. This forum is therefore an important platform for us to discuss and share ideas and experiences in order to find out what went wrong and to find better ways to reconcile and to establish peace. As we all know, conflict does not only take human lives, it destroys communities and erodes development gains. But most importantly, conflict leaves a legacy of fear, hostility, and trauma. Maybe the nature of conflict has changed radically over the last 50 years, particularly since the end of World War II. A drastic consequence of this change is the enormous effect that war has on civilian populations. Every war takes an enormous toll on a country, and the cost of war can never be adequately reflected in any real terms. We may be able to approximate how much is spent on a war effort in terms of personnel, equipment, and arms. We can assess the damage done to the physical infrastructure and losses to a country from destruction of normal economic and development activities. We can count the number of people killed and maimed in a war or internal conflict, as well as the number of refugees and internally displaced persons. But the hidden costs of war and conflict are rarely taken into account. The massive outflow of refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants include the very people upon whom the economy of a country depends and represents an enormous loss of human resources that could contribute greatly to the economic development of the country. The effect of war on people's lives because of the death of loved ones, the destruction of property and economic base, displacement, fear, and physical insecurity, the growth of a culture of violence, and the loss of human rights can never be adequately measured. Human beings are killed, the social and economic infrastructure is destroyed, women are widowed, and children orphaned, and large numbers of people deprived of a decent human existence. Such costs are hidden and rarely calculated, including even soldiers who participate in the war. When they go back home, the trauma of getting involved in the war, even though they come back as victors, can be very considerable. Internal wars can deeply damage and erode the traditional value system and moral foundation of the affected society. Violence becomes part of the political and social institution of the country and undermines the fragile democratic processes. When we add to this the enormous cost to the international community of trying to resolve conflict, the cost of maintaining peacekeeping forces, the cost of humanitarian assistance, and the prohibitive cost of post-war reconstruction in affected countries, we conclude, therefore, that more effort should be put into actively promoting the prevention of conflict. But can we prevent violent conflict? Prevention of conflict would, by any standards, be far less expensive than trying to resolve conflict, and it makes much more practical sense. Conflict prevention, or even intervention at a very early stage in the conflict, represents the best possibilities for peace. If conflict prevention is going to be taken seriously, then early warning systems, which will indicate when and where conflicts are likely to take place, have to be developed, put in place, and taken seriously. Conflict prevention must go beyond the military efforts and include political, economic, social, and humanitarian measures which would decrease the potential for conflict. This demands much greater coordination amongst all agencies involved and the development of a much more integrated approach to conflict and its resolution. In a real sense, the ultimate goal in the work of conflict resolution is the achievement of reconciliation, to move from a situation where we have reached a peaceful settlement to a new place where broken relationships between groups and between individuals, or even between countries, can be rebuilt, and where healing can take place. This is the challenge of reconciliation. In internal conflict, the futures of conflicting parties are inevitably linked together. To achieve reconciliation, we must create or provide space where counter and counter can take place and where relationships can be healed. To do this, we must help people come to terms with the tragic and painful past. Psychological and social healing are important aspects of reconciliation. Victims must have the opportunity to acknowledge their pain and have their pain acknowledged. The opportunity to ask for forgiveness and the opportunity to forgive must be created. Spreading a culture of peace, in my opinion, is most critical to the society. If the society is to come out of the shadows of conflict and make a new beginning, its members must be inculcated in a culture of peace. A culture of peace is a set of values, attitudes, and ways of life based on the principles of freedom, justice, democracy, tolerance, solidarity, respect for diversity, dialogue, and understanding. It targets individuals. There cannot be true peace unless the mind is at peace. Culture of peace also brings together all actors. In addition to states and international organizations, actions to promote culture of peace can be undertaken by communities, by religious leaders, parents, families, teachers, artists, professors, journalists, and students, i.e. people from all walks of life can be involved in a process to create this culture of peace. It sets its goals not on the principle of an eye for an eye, but on tolerance, solidarity, and dialogue to settle differences and heal wounds. In the changed world we live in, it is time for us to discard the eye for an eye approach. It is time for us to preach the culture of peace. We have to take this mindset to every human mind to extinguish the evils of intolerance and prejudice, ignorance and selfishness that compel them to repeat the cycle of violence. One specific contribution that Malaysia can play, and this forms the underpinning value in relation to the culture of peace comes in the form of our call for a global movement of moderates. If all of us, irrespective of our faith, believe in moderation, then the voice of moderation will replace those of extremism, intolerance, hatred, and bigotry. It is with this enduring value that was used as a guidance to help find a peaceful solution to the Bangsa Moro and brought an end to a 40-year conflict that had claimed 150,000 lives. I will leave it to His Excellency Haji Murad to expound to the whole process that led to the interim agreement that was signed recently in Manila. But from Malaysia's perspective, there are a couple of important technical points, if you like, that help us along this road to achieve ultimate peace in the context of the conflict in southern Philippines. Number one, both sides must be ready for peace. There must be that mindset, and there was that mindset for a number of years, that they want to reconcile, they want to find a peaceful solution. Then comes the question of how. The mechanics, the details, the technical aspects. And by and large, when two people quarrel, much like when a husband and wife quarrel, perhaps, it's useful to find a third person. And in the case of the conflict in southern Philippines, they found us, they found Malaysia. And that third person must be seen and truly to be an honest broker. You cannot play a part to help reconcile two warring factions or two sides at odds with one another if you do not exhibit the role of an honest broker. And in this case, in southern Philippines, we became the honest broker, and we were trusted. We were trusted by the MILF, we were trusted by the Philippines government. Once we have that trust, then the road towards ultimate peace and reconciliation will be not too an arduous road and journey to accomplish. But you have to be patient. We were there in the Philippines, southern Philippines, since 2001. We had an IMT, International Monetary Team. And that's also important. That's the other point I'd like to emphasize. You need to have people on the ground. People to see, people to monitor, people to ensure that your terms that you've agreed will be fully implemented. And if you have an international monetary team from outside, both sides really have the imperative to observe the understanding. And that created the atmosphere for the final reconciliation. So that's a wonderful example. There could be a template to be used, the principles, in other situations which may be more complex. Certainly Gaza and the whole Palestinian issue is a hugely more challenging and complex situation, but I have urged, others have urged, when I was in Nov Perdana recently, I urged President Obama, please intervene, please do something. And I was grateful. The same night, he made many phone calls to the Middle East and at least we have some sort of truce, for the time being at least. But we hope and we call for the whole Middle East peace process to be resuscitated. And that has to be based on the principle of somebody has to be an honest broker, to be fair to the Palestinian and to be fair to the Israelis too, based on a two-state solution. In another context, how do we create this culture of trust, of peace, of some sort of solidarity? It is for us to form community of nations. After the Second World War, Europe created the European Union and NATO. That heralded, since the Second World War until today, a long period of peace in Europe, except for Bosnia. And that's a block in terms of the European experience and legacy, because of the failure to intervene in Bosnia at a much earlier stage. But at least Europe, between nations, has been at peace. But of course now, they're settled with a debt problem. That's another issue. But in terms of the conflict between nations, European Union, NATO created that sense of peace and solidarity. And closer to home, by 2015, ASEAN will be a community. And the fact that ASEAN now is moving, surely, slowly but surely, to become a community of nations by 2015, means that the chances of any conflict within ASEAN is down to a very minimum. Because we have the sense that we're going to be a community. And in a recent ASEAN summit, I could see that. I mean, all ASEAN leaders, without exception, and we are looking forward to the creation of ASEAN as a community. And what does that mean? It means that we must be together. It means that there must be an ASEAN solidarity. It must be that the sense that we are a community. And if you are a community, you cannot be at odds with one another. Certainly when you have problems within ASEAN, and we do have some problems within ASEAN, some boundaries, some maritime boundaries have not been resolved, totally resolved. But we have to find a mechanism for it. We have to find the way to move forward for the ultimate resolution of such differences. And there will be differences between neighbors, but differences can be resolved, differences can be reconciled. There are mechanisms for this. So we look forward to a long, long period of peace and stability in this part of the world. Even in the context of the South China Sea, which has been played out by the press during the conference as though the ASEAN summit was defined by the South China Sea issue. But actually the summit was much more than that. Even that, as complex as South China Sea, there are principles. For example, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, the Declaration of Conduct, and making it, translating to the Code of Conduct, where countries agree not to use force. Countries agree not to increase tension. Countries agree that we should sit down, negotiate, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how complex it is, no matter how long it takes. It doesn't matter. What matters is that the entire region must be a region of peace and stability. And this must be our commitment. Whether you're a big power or a small power, we must be committed to peace and stability. Because that's the bedrock of prosperity. For economic gains, for development to take place, for change and transformation. What that requires is it requires peace and stability. Without peace and stability, it's as basic as that. maybe it's just too basic, but it's worth reminding ourselves. There's something that might be so basic that sometimes our actions may actually exacerbate the problem. And therefore, we need to remind ourselves as responsible leaders, as responsible members of political parties, we must play our part. And that's the reason why we are here at this international forum. For us not to be warlike in our thinking, but for us to go back with a sense that we all have our role to play as part of the political process in our respective countries to ensure that this entire region and beyond to be a region of peace and stability and hence prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, the 20th century left us a legacy of war and conflict amongst nations. Unfortunately, the 21st century started in a similar way. However, it is not a time to despair, for the dream of having a better and safer world has not vanished. As a number of violent conflicts still continue in different parts of the world, it is time to renew efforts to stop the tragedy of war and conflict. Ultimately, we have no choice but to take the path of peace. And peace can be built only through action and not with passivity. We have been clear, honest, and open in our desire to make this world a peaceful place. As a small nation, this is the role most suited for us, for Malaysia. Drumming up support for people affected by conflict, who have been among the biggest victims of bloodshed, no matter where in the world. War is a tragedy that will cause nightmare and haunt its victims for the rest of their lives. On this note, I wish the delegates and participants in this forum a productive and interesting conference, and may our prayers be with the victims of war and conflict, regardless of where they are. On that note, it gives me great pleasure to declare the third UMNO International Forum